So with that, let me introduce our presenter, Trevor Dotson, and sit back and enjoy the program. Thanks again. And yeah, he'll go through the Q&A and chat and all that. So thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And I'll start sharing my screen, hopefully. All right, can everybody see my screen?
Looks good.
Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
All right, that's good. All right, so I am Trevor Dotson. I am the manager of operations here at the Charlevoix Historical Society, for anybody who does not know me. I did see a lot of familiar faces that I've seen here at the museum or in town, so that's good. I want to thank you for joining us today, and if you would like to support the Charlevoix Historical Society, please visit our website, chxhistory.com, to make a donation, become a member, or to subscribe to our e-newsletter. Please remember to keep your microphone on mute, and this presentation will be recorded. If that works, Denise, you might want to try and hit record at some point in the next couple minutes. And there will be a Q&A session at the end at which we will stop recording. And if you have questions during the presentation, you can also type them into the chat box, which is down below. And Denise, remember, if somebody is unmuted, you possibly can mute them from your end.
Yeah, okay.
So I found this thought or saying on the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office website, and it says, historic structures are tangible links to our past. They impart a sense of identity, stability, and orientation to a community. As we go through the presentation, I hope you think about the places in Charlevoix that have given you great memories and impart a sense of identity that this area truly is Charlevoix the Beautiful. So our first image, in this program, we're going to start from the south side of town and then work our way towards downtown and then across the bridge to the north side. So our first image is the Belvedere Golf Course Clubhouse soon after its construction in 1926. You'll notice that it's so new they haven't even laid the landscaping down around the building yet. The golf course is one of two in the city designed by famous golf course architect Willie Watson, the other being the Charlevoix Golf Club, which has since been remodeled. In 1929, the club hosted a tournament called the Great Lakes Open Championship. Pro golfer and 11-time major winner Walter Hagen won the championship, beating other well-known professional golfers of that era. The course has hosted the Michigan Amateur Championship a record 40 times and will be the host in 2025. Here we see the Coffee Cup in the mid-1950s. This establishment opened in the late 1940s. An ad from the Charlevoix Courier in 1948 read, "Keeping up the old Maneva tradition of good food and service." The Maneva was a popular eatery downtown, but it closed in 45 after the building caught fire, which we'll talk about later. For 27 years, Drew Loretz served breakfast at this location, and I'm sure many of you have had some fond memories of eating there. The business closed in October of 2015, and the building was demolished shortly thereafter. In its place, we now have another local favorite, pigs eating ribs. As families began to travel more and more by automobile in the 1940s and early 50s, many motels and cabins began to pop up along the highways. Here in Charlevoix, Taylor's Cabins, located on the southeast corner of Bridge Street and Carpenter Street, gave many tired travelers a cozy place to stay. Today, this intersection is a self-clean car wash. If you look close in the background, you can see some of the white wooden posts that line the circle drive to the cabin entrance. The Ferry Seed Company was built along the shores of Lake Charlevoix around Ferry Road between 1892 and 93 and was named after its owner, D.M. Ferry. Its purpose was the production of seed stock harvested from local farms. The original building burned down in October of 1904, but a new building, seen in this photo, was constructed. The business was eventually relocated to Rochester, Michigan sometime prior to 1940. In 1940, Harry Foster and William Wallace bought the building to manufacture wood products and small watercraft. The company was called Foster Boat Works. During World War II, the Federal War Department wanted small single outboard crafts for the purpose of carrying Allied troops across the Mosel and Rhine rivers into the upcoming thrust towards Berlin. Foster Boat Works was one of the businesses that was contracted to build these boats. The company ceased operations in 1953, and the building saw a few more businesses before it eventually became abandoned. In the mid-1980s, developers transformed the building into the condominiums under the name Foster Boat Works. Here's an image of the building at the point where it was abandoned, and then another view of the building from the lakeside. Here we see a home at 105 East Garfield Street. I don't really have any information about this house, but I thought it was a nice picture of some local architecture, and the house has not changed much over the course of the years. Oh, my coworker David Miles' mother grew up there, so there's a fact that I just learned. This house at 704 Bridge Street between Upright and Hurlbut was once the home of local farmer John Jaliffy and his family. And this building, or this house, has not changed too much over the years as well. The house has lost some of the ornamental decoration and the entrances have been reworked, but otherwise it retains its basic footprint. Today, the house is used for office space and as a photography studio. 601 Bridge Street, built in 1882, was the home of Charlevoix native Dr. Robert Bruce Armstrong. I am unaware when the home was torn down, but it was prior to the mid-1960s. Today, the site is the home of this office complex. As you can see, the stone wall and the staircase are still present. This is 216 Antrim Street, which was the home of Dr. L.B. Bartlett and family. It is presumed that Bartlett is at far right underneath the sign bearing his name. Aside from being a physician, Bartlett also ran a hotel on Bridge Street, which we'll see later, for about 15 years. He later ran a boarding house on Park Avenue. The footprint of the home was altered over time. Noticeable differences are loss of the bay window on the side, the porch being enclosed, and the loss of ornamental decoration. Today, the home thankfully looks closer to its original design. This is what Belvedere Avenue looked like in the early 1900s. As you can see along Round Lake, there are many, many fishnet reels. This house is 206 Belvedere Avenue, which was known as the Parson Brewer home for a while. This photo is circa 1890s. And this house itself has not changed too much over the years. This is its neighboring house, which is now 207 Hurlbut. And as you will see, the attic space, I'll go back a little bit, the attic space on this house has been altered and the ornamentation has been lost. But otherwise, the house is still in very good shape. This is 213 Belvedere Avenue, circa 1903. It was the home of commercial fisherman Captain Geick C. Geiken. Shown in this photo is Miss Emma Geiken, baby Harold Geiken sitting on the grass, and little boy Cornelius Geiken on the bike. This home was demolished at some point, and this larger craftsman-style home took its place. Here is the stone wall that indicates the beginning of the Belvedere Club along Belvedere Avenue. This is just a short distance from Gray Gables on the opposite side of the road. The house in the distance is still present today, and the trees have matured quite a bit, which is to be expected. The Charlevoix Summer Resort, now known as the Belvedere Club, was established in 1878 by members of the Baptist faith from Kalamazoo. One of the early homes constructed within the resort was the Bluebell. The home is an example of stick-style architecture and has a multi-cross floor plan. It also features a tower, which is a popular feature for resort houses during the late 1890s. The house today looks very similar to its original form. Some noted changes are the extension of the roof over the porch, and the entry doors that were centered above the stairs are now a big picture window. The Charlevoix Summer Resort boat livery was located on the south shore of Round Lake across from Park Island. As the name suggests, guests could rent canoes, rowboats, or sailboats. The Chicago Clubhouse can be seen in the distance in the top right corner. Today, this area are boat slips and boathouses for the Belvedere Club members. The Belvedere Hotel on the corner of Belvedere Avenue and Ferry Avenue was built in 1887 to replace an earlier clubhouse that burned in 1886. After the arrival of the railroad to Charlevoix in 1892, the hotel saw 2 expansions, bringing the number of rooms from 40 to 87. By the time the Great Depression hit, the hotel was already finding it difficult to fill rooms, but it managed to stay open. The number of guests continued to decline through the 1940s and 50s, and the hotel was raised in 1960. Here we'll see another image of the Belvedere Hotel looking kind of southwesterly. And then one more image of the Belvedere Hotel looking the opposite direction down Belvedere Avenue. And then here's the hotel being deconstructed in 1960. And then approximately what that location looks like today, a little bit further up the road. Here's a photo from the 1890s approximately of the Charlevoix summer resort cottages on the bluff above Ferry Avenue. And what some of the cottages look like today. When the railroad came to Charlevoix in 1892, the Charlevoix Summer Resort Association was promised their own depot so that their members would not have to make the 2-mile trip by carriage from the depot on the other side of Round Lake or have to take a boat taxi to the resort dock. Construction began in July 1892 and the depot was completed only a few weeks later. The stop at the depot along the rail line was called Belvedere, and it is believed that because of this, the Charlevoix Summer Resort Association was often referred to as simply Belvedere. Maybe it was because it was easier to say, or maybe it had a nice ring to it, but the association was officially renamed the Belvedere Club in 1923. The station remained in service until 1931 when it mysteriously burned. The origin of the fire was never determined and the replacement depot was never built. And today it's just a kind of a hedgerow or a bunch of bushes that block off the beach over there. Here's another view from the hotel looking down at the depot. And then what that area looked like just a couple days ago. Here's the Belvedere Casino, a meeting and recreation hall that was built between the hotel and the railroad around 1922. This picture was taken from the railroad trestle as the rails can be seen in the lower left corner of the photo. The building is still in use today, and this is a picture from the opposite side taken from Ferry Avenue. The railroad bridge was also constructed in 1892 and first swung open on June 4th and was pronounced almost ready for traffic. Rails were laid across the bridge 6 days later as ballast work continued on both sides. Here we have an image of an engine coming across the bridge heading south. Here's an image of a freight train coming across the bridge heading south. This is from approximately 1978. And then this is what the area looks like, of course, today. When rail traffic ceased operation to Charlevoix in 1982, the citizens had a decision to make about the fate of the bridge. Many discussions were held about whether the bridge could and should be saved. The final consensus was it was not economically feasible and the bridge was deconstructed in the autumn of 1983. We'll now skip across town to the Boulder Park area. This is the Redmore House, which was built by Earl Young in Boulder Park. Its construction began around 1925. Other than the red mortar, Young added another unique element to the house by embedding large stones in the stucco of the north and west gables. The exterior of the house today looks very similar to when it was constructed. Shortly after construction began on the red mortar house, the white mortar house began to go up. In this photo, likely from early 1926, we can see some wood cross beams being used during the construction. The house was built in the American thatch style, but instead of a thatch roof, it features a tile roof with thick underslung eaves. And this is how the Whitemore house appears today. Very similar to what it was like when it was first built. This is a look up Eastern Avenue. This image was likely taken the same day as the previous image from 1926. Earl Young's stone cairns mark the entrance to the road, and the Whitemore house can be seen in the distance. Today, hedges almost completely obscure the Whitemore house from view. Construction of this home, which was one of the first 5 in Boulder Park, was started in September of 1926. Around 1929, it became the summer residence of Norman Panama, one of Hollywood's leading producers, writers, and directors. He co-wrote one of my favorite holiday movies, White Christmas. The house is often referred to as the Panama House, as you'll see the second story and the apse-like extension were later additions. And we'll take another look at this house in these 2 photos. You'll notice the dormer and the extension on the side of the house there. This is one of Earl Young's most recognizable structures, Boulder Manor. This is during its construction circa 1928. By late 1929, he had the stone walls finished along with the upper floor, but when the Great Depression hit, he lost the house to the bank. He regained possession in 1937 and completed the house in the mid-1940s. Here we see what is known as Southpoint on the shores of Lake Michigan. This image is taken from Lakeshore Drive in Boulder Park. Today, this is of course the site of St. Mary's Cement. Construction began on the plant in 1965. And surprisingly, even though Earl Young was still renting and selling lots in Boulder Park in the 1960s, he was not against having the cement plant built on Southpoint. Though he did say he wished the dock was built on the other side of the point. All right, now we'll head back towards the downtown where we'll see several major changes to the streetscape over the years. This was Charlevoix's town hall and later the Charlevoix County Courthouse. It was built in 1884 on the west side of State Street on the west side of State Street at the Antrim Street corner. The Charlevoix Rough and Ready Fire Company *1 is shown with the fire engine named Little Silsby. The sign on the corner between the horse and the wagon driver says Township Library and Public Reading Room, because this is where the town's 3rd library was located. Part of the courthouse was destroyed by fire on Christmas Eve, 1907. However, the building was spared and repairs were made, and it was still in use afterwards. Here is how the building looked in 1916. You'll notice the roof is much different. This building was demolished in the 1950s to make way for a new county building with a modern design, amenities, and made of, quote, fireproof materials. The building opened in 1959 and is still in use today. The 4th schoolhouse in Charlevoix in the foreground was erected in 1889. The building was built of white brick, and the school was known as the Central Building. In 1901, a new high school was built next to the Central Building, and it was called the McKinley High School in honor of President McKinley, who was assassinated earlier that year. From 1920 to 26, the Board of Education purchased 12 lots on Grant Street to build the new grade school, which is today's library. The school opened in 1928. 40 years later, a new grade school opened in Charlevoix Township's north sector, and this school became the middle school. Heading back towards downtown, this is 103 Clinton Street. It was a monuments works owned by C.O.W. Smith, who was the brother of then Charlevoix Sentinel editor Willard Smith. This building was located, like I said, at 103 State Street. At an unknown date, the monuments work building was torn down or destroyed, and a small brick building was built on the location, presumably in the 1930s based off of the architecture. Novotny Plumbing Shop resided here for a time. Today, the building is an optometrist office. This is 202 Clinton Street, at one time the residence of Reverend C.F. Van Auken, who was the first minister of the Congregational Church. In April 1992, to make room for a parking lot for the First State Bank, the house was completely lifted off its foundation and moved to Boyne City Road, just a little ways past the Argonne Supper Club. And as you can see, this spot is now a parking lot, unfortunately. On the opposite side of the street was this home at 203 Clinton. And currently, this house is a parking lot as well for the Charlevoix State Bank, unfortunately. This was the home of Thomas Milner and his family. Milner worked for a few lumber companies throughout northern Michigan. They're pretty hard to see, but if you look closely in the background, you can see some of the tall trees that had still not yet been chopped down by the lumbermen. If you look off to the left of the upright part of the house. Today, this larger home resides on that site. And it might be that this house was incorporated into the former house, but I can't really be sure of that. Charlevoix City Hall was designed by architect G. Harold Thompson of Mullet Lake, Michigan. The building was partly funded by the Public Works Administration and is a fine example of PWA modern architecture, which was prevalent from 1933 to 1944. The building was dedicated in February of 1940. Next door is the Baptist Church, which was built from 1888 to 1889. The church was raised in February of 1969 after the congregation moved to a new church built on M66. The fire hall, which is there today, was built in 1986, and the ribbon cutting was done using the jaws of life. And here's a side view of City Hall. And those bays, of course, were moved over to the State Street side. And that's what it looks like today. Here we have a view of State Street looking north towards Park Avenue from Mason Street in the 1920s. In 1956, City Council approved the removal of the islands and new lights were installed on each side of the street, which forced some of those stately maple trees to be cut down. Here we have another view of State Street looking down towards Park Avenue. And here's what that view would look like today. Back in March, I posted this circa 1950s Bob Miles photo on the Historical Society's Facebook page. And to my surprise, it garnered lots of attention and comments about people's memories of tapping the maple trees along State Street every March. And sadly, most of those trees are now gone. And they've been cutting more and more of them since I've been here. The Carnegie Library at the northwest corner of State Street and Clinton Street was built in 1909 and was in use until 1968, when the library moved into its new location on Clinton Street, which is now currently the Circle of Arts. The basement of the Carnegie Library also served as the offices for the offices of the city, because City Hall was not completed until 1939. Demolition of this building began in 1968 to make way for the Charlevoix State Savings Bank. This house was built in 1883 and was once the home of Lemuel D. Bartholomew and family. Bartholomew co-owned a hardware store on the southwest corner of Bridge Street and Park Avenue, which featured a 600-seat auditorium on the top level. The house was torn down in 1969 to make way for the present-day bank. And I'm sure many people are familiar with this house, which was the home of Horace and Marguerite Harsha, which was built in 1892. Horace moved to Charlevoix in 1882 from Ohio and established a local real estate and insurance business. He was also a local civic leader in the village. He built the Harsha building on Bridge Street, which today is the Cherry Republic store. We'll see this building later. He and Marguerite raised 5 children in this home, and they lived here until their deaths, Horace in 1929 and Maggie in 1936. In 1943, their eldest son, John, had the home remodeled into 3 apartments, which he, along with assistance of Earl Young, rented out to summer people. In 1978, the Charlevoix Historical Society was searching for a permanent headquarters, and members approached Anne Harsha, John's daughter, about purchasing the home. Anne died within a month of this inquiry, but it was later learned that she deeded the house to the society. Here's a picture of the home, possibly in the 1980s. And then here is a picture of the house after much work has been done through our capital campaign. Here's another view of State Street looking towards the Harsha house. And if you notice the row of bushes between the house and the church, watch how much they grow up. I think maybe we should take care of those a little bit better in the future. Here's another image of State Street. This is State Street looking down south towards Mason Street with a parade. And here's how that would look today. In this image, we see 110 Park Avenue and the Congregational Church. The first Congregational Church was formed in 1882, and the church building was completed in 1885. The exterior of the church has changed little over the years, aside from a large addition being added to the rear of the building in 1970. In the foreground, as I said, was 110 Park Avenue, which is now a CPA firm. And neither of those structures have changed too much. This house was 201 Park Avenue. It was demolished in December 1966, and it became the Captain's Watch Condominiums, which were built in 1979. This home was located at 209 Park Avenue, and the Oldham Club is located up the driveway behind the house along the bluff of the channel. The club provided fine dining and unpublicized gambling. The club was eventually sold to a new owner who started the Tower Hotel that's seen in this photo. Today, it is the site of another condominium complex. This is the first house Earl Young built between 1919 and 1921 to accommodate his growing family. It reflected the American arts and crafts style in its horizontal emphasis, its wide eaves, and its exposed rafters. The house was remodeled from 2014 to 2015. The drastic change in the house's appearance led some locals to fear what drastic changes could be done to other Earl Young structures. This in turn led to countless hours of work by a group of citizens to create a local historic district to help protect the Earl Young homes along Park Avenue. This is one of the earliest known photos of Bridge Street. It was possibly taken as early as 1878. We are looking north from Belvedere Avenue. And now we have jumped to 1925. And over on the right, we can see the construction of a bandstand, which will become the Chamber of Commerce, which we'll see later. And now we've jumped all the way up to the 1980s. And we see some maybe familiar things like the Market Mall. And now we see what it looks like today. And I want to go back just one moment. I'm really glad that they took down those very tall, stark looking street lamps and replaced them with these nicer, more decorative ones. The Hotel Elston was built in 1898 at the southwest corner of Bridge Street and Antrim Street. Its south wing replaced Newman Street between State Street and Bridge Street. The arrival of the railroad to Charlevoix in 1892 meant more rooms were needed, and the 50-room Elston helped fill this need. A fire in 1915 destroyed all but the facades of the Hotel Elston, but it was rebuilt with 3 wings for a total of 92 rooms. The hotel went through several name changes, one of them being the Lakeview Inn, which we see here in this photo from the 1940s. The hotel was sold in the early 60s and demolished to make way for Olson's Plaza. This little house once stood on the northwest corner of Bridge Street and Antrim Street. The fate of the house is unknown, but it was gone by 1911, as this is when SMC erected this building, which is now the Villager Pub, for his furniture store. This building, located next to the C building, was built by Benjamin Brown and served as a Ford and Overland dealership and service garage. If you look closely, you can see at the curbside a gas pump, and an air hose. So cars could just pull right up to the front, fill up, or get some air. In the 1980s and early 1990s, this was the market mall that we previously saw. In around 1994, the building was gutted and transformed into the building we see today, with Munson Wellness Workshop, Charlevoix Courier Office, and Charlevoix Wear on the ground floors with condos above. The Masonic Temple building, located at the southwest corner of Bridge Street and Mason Street, was started in 1912. From 1923 until almost the end of the century, it was a drugstore. In these photos, it's Schroeder Drugs. Today, the front of the building is Subway, and the top is still used by the Masons. On the other side of the 400 block of Bridge Street stood this building, built by Egbert Carpenter. It housed the Carpenter and Miller grocery store, F.G. Heinz drugstore, and apparently they sold furniture as well. Heinz and B.W. Miller sold the building, and it was demolished to make way for today's East Park. In its place, an open-air bandstand was built. In the late 1920s, it was glassed in and a roof was put on top so it could serve as the Chamber of Commerce. In 1968, the Chamber moved into a new building that was built nearby at the corner of Antrim and Bridge. Today, it is approximately the location of the band shell or the seating area. This is a view of East Park in the 1930s. We can see, is it LeBlanc? LeBlanc Fish Market, Ward's Marina, and the old Chamber of Commerce building. And this is what that view would look like does look like today. Here's a photo of Round Lake Harbor. The date is unknown. Notice that there is no safety railing along the sidewalk. I always get a kick out of that. The south shore of the lake is still predominantly fishing companies and boathouses when this photo was taken. But now today, it's predominantly condos and houses. Only Ward Brothers and John Cross Fisheries remain present on that side of the lake. Here we are looking south toward the Milton Block grocery store and the roof line of the building that once housed George Priest's photography studio and later was the Parkside restaurant. And those buildings came down in the 1990s. I believe 1996 is when the Parkside came down. And here is another view looking more southwesterly with some people playing shuffleboard at East Park and what that location looks like today. This is East Park in the 1930s looking north towards the Maneva Cafe, which we see Irene Harsha Young's map of Charlevoix and Petoskey region painted on the side of the building. We can also see the one of the park's two fish ponds and people playing shuffleboard off to the right. Today, the building which was once the Maneva Cafe is gone, and we can see Harwood Gold across Clinton Street. The shuffleboard courts were removed during East Park's renovation in 2007. This is the northwest corner of Bridge Street and Mason Street in around the 1890s. In this 1940s view, we see Dahlquist's Five and Dime store, Staley's Hardware, Bergen's Clothing Store, and the A&P Grocery Store. Today, it is the location of the clothing company and the three buildings that were damaged by the first fire that occurred in 2016. All of those buildings have since been rebuilt. This photo from 1934 was taken by Earl Young. It's a little earlier than the previous photo, and it shows Bergen's Clothing Store at far right, Staley's Hardware in the center, and Art Fagan's Pool Hall and Recreation Hall on the left. And today, this is where there's a t-shirt store in the one on the left. The middle one is currently empty, and Seabags is in the one on the right. Moving a little bit further down the street than the previous photo, we now see Mott's Cafe and Restaurant on the left, and the Charlevoix Fruit Market on the right next to Hoop Skirt Alley. Today, this is the location of Gaga for Kids and Celeste Murdoch Fudge. Here's another view from East Park of the 300 block. And what that view approximately looks like today. This was Burt Mason's store, which sold groceries, flour, feed, and even paints. It was located on the east side of Bridge Street in the 300 block where East Park is today. This hotel was built in 1881. It was originally named the Bridge Street House. It was across from today's Hoop Skirt Alley and was a very large building which stretched all the way from the sidewalk almost down to the shore of Round Lake. It was purchased by Dr. L.B. Bartlett, who we mentioned earlier, in 1898 and renamed Hotel Bartlett. After a couple more changes of hands, it was later called the Hotel Charlevoix. In June of 1935, the hotel burned and was a complete loss. Today, the location is, of course, East Park. And here's another view if you were staying on the sidewalk outside the hotel looking south, and what that would approximately look like today. And this was Ed Goldstick's shoe repair service, which was located just south of the hotel. It survived the fire that destroyed it. And if you notice off to the left is the big void where the building once was. Charlevoix pioneer Morris J. Stockman constructed this building on the southeast corner of Bridge Street and Clint Street in 1881. It was the first brick structure on Bridge Street. It was originally Stockman's hardware store, and many years later was the Maneva Cafe, which I mentioned earlier. A gas explosion ripped through the basement of the building in December 1945 and almost killed the proprietor and left him with third-degree burns. The blaze spread through the building, making it a total loss. The remainder of the building was torn down the following year. Here's a side view looking towards the 300 and 200 blocks. And if you'll notice, Rexall Drugs at that time was still, or Central Drug Store was still 3 stories at that time. In the late 1870s or early 1880s, attorney E.H. Green built his residence and a smaller law/real estate office on the east side of the 200 block of Bridge Street. In 1885, Green built the ornamental building to the right. And that same year, the Bank of Charlevoix erected the building on the corner. Here are the same buildings in the late 1910s or early 1920s. If you notice, Green's home and law office are gone, and it's now the Palace Theater. Moving forward to the 1960s, we see Earl Young's real estate office, a cigar soda shop, and Murdoch's famous fudge. And then today, the buildings are Maison Jardin and Harwood Gold. Here we see the southwest corner of Bridge Street and Clint Street, circa 1960s. We can see Rexall Central Drugstore has not changed much since then. And next to it going south is a bakery, then Herb's Cocktail Lounge, Buddy's Pizza, and then a car sales lot. Today, we see Momentum Clothing Store next to Central Drugs, followed by East Park Tavern, Charlevoix Pizza, and American Spoon. The Charlevoix County Bank moved into this large building on the northwest corner of Bridge Street and Clint Street in 1904. The bank took up only a portion of the floor space, and Crane's Dry Goods Store took up the rest on the ground level. In February 1924, with temperatures at 28 below zero, a faulty flue caused a fire that completely destroyed the building. Some of the walls collapsed into the streets. By June 1924, this new 2-story building was built on the site of the Charlevoix County Bank. The building next door with Selma Pearl's Barber and Beauty Shop was built a short time later. However, after World War II, the Charlevoix County Bank had outgrown its current building and it expanded into the storefronts next door. Today, these buildings are North Seas Gallery and Kilwin's Chocolates. To the north of the Charlevoix County Bank in the 200 block were these two small businesses, which were Jim Bracken's Bar and the Campbell Boot Shop. Jim Bracken's Bar is now the Townhouse Bar, and Campbell's Boot Shop is now Boutique Emmanuel. This photo, circa 1912, shows the newly built Charlevoix State Savings Bank on the left, the Van Pelt Building, formerly the Harsha Building, in the middle, and across Van Pelt Alley, where the American flag is located, was the post office, also constructed by George Van Pelt in 1911. As many of you know, these buildings were affected by a fire on Christmas Eve in 2016, but thankfully they were all saved. In this photo, we see that the brickwork is still being worked on Cherry Republic. Here's another angle of those buildings. This is when the building was first built by Horace Harsha, which is, you see Harsha's name is up at the top. And now, of course, today it says Van Pelt, as he sold the building to Van Pelt, who redid the facade a little bit back in 1910. Here's a head-on view of the building that we just discussed that was across Van Pelt Alley. This image is from around the 1930s when it was the Gamble store. And today it is now northbound. This is M.S. Moulton's jewelry store, circa late 19th century. These buildings have long since been torn down, and today the site is currently the Taffy Barrel and Elements Gallery. On the east side of Bridge Street in the 200 block were the Crowder Building on the left and the Archibald Butters Building on the right. The Crowder Building, built by Dr. G.W. Crowder, is likely the oldest remaining building on Bridge Street. It once housed a drugstore on the main floor, a dentist office, and the first telephone company on the second floor. The Butters Building was built in 1882 and housed Butters Insurance on the top floor and George W. Miller's clothing store on the main level. Today, that French Place and Round Lake Bookstore occupy these buildings. This is the Martin Block grocery store, located just to the north of today's That French Place. And it is currently Paddle Works in the front and Bridge Street Tap Room in the rear. This late 19th century photo shows the southwest corner of Bridge Street and Park Avenue. Here we see Bartholomew Blanchard Hardware Store, a drugstore, Dr. Perry's dentist office, and Frank Wood's barbershop. In the early 1920s, the corner store was Floyd Fessenden Drugstore. The store and its two neighbors were destroyed by fire in March 1925. Here we see a view from the 1970s with Shop of the Galls and Benjamin Twiggs being on the ground floor of the new buildings. And today the building has Berkshire Hathaway and is it Elements? Yeah, I think Elements is next door. And here we have a street view of the businesses at the corner of Bridge Street and Park Avenue around the 1930s and how that looks today. This image shows the Charlevoix Sentinel building and Gaelic Saloon. These were on the east side of Bridge Street. And today it's part of the open space next to Bridge Street Tap Room. Here are the same two buildings viewed from the opposite direction, looking towards the bridge and the channel. And this is part of the open space and part of the space leading down towards Bridge Street Park. Or Bridge Park, I should say. The Bellinger Building was built around the late 1880s. Charles Bellinger and his family lived in the left half, and he ran a novelty store out of the other side. Charles Jr. later turned the building into a jewelry store. And these buildings were located where Glick's and Scobie's are today. In 1927, the Lewis Grand Opera House was transformed into a hotel on the top floors and an ornamental rug emporium on the main floor. The hotel lasted 20 years, but was demolished in 1947 to make way for the current bridge over the channel. And this is an approximate location of where it was. It was probably a little bit closer to the channel. After a schooner and later a tug ran into the second bridge in 1877, leaving it inoperable, a new bridge was needed. This bridge was erected and opened in June of 1878. Only 22 years later, the bridge was in rough shape, with the center foundation being described by the Charlevoix Sentinel as very precarious. The bridge was torn down in February and March. The bridge was torn down in February and March of 1901, and construction began on this bridge, which opened later that year. This bridge was in operation until 1947, when the current Memorial Bridge was built and completed in 1949. And here's another view of the bridge that preceded our current bridge. The life-saving station was constructed on the south side of the channel in 1900 and began service in 1901. The station was in service until 1962, when the then Coast Guard moved to a new building on the east side of Round Lake. This station was removed in 1965, and the property was reverted to the city. The city powerhouse can be seen in this picture, and it was at least gone. I think it caught fire, right? Did it catch fire also?
No, I just think it was torn down.
Oh, they tore it down. They tore the power plant down, and it was gone by at least 1917, which is when the current fish hatchery building was built. And this is what that location would look like today, or does look like today. Here's an early 1900s photo looking east down the channel. The Louis Grand Opera House can be seen in the distance. And you can see the life-saving station, of course. And this is approximately what that view would look like today, or does look like today. Now we are looking west out towards Lake Michigan. If you notice that the lighthouse is on the north pier in this photo. In 1910, the south pier was extended in stages and replanked. For reasons unknown, it was decided that the lighthouse should be moved to the south pier. The following year, the lighthouse was indeed moved. The method for how they moved it is still unknown. And sometime after the move, the lighthouse was painted red. And here we have a couple more pictures of the channel and the lighthouse. Now take a close look at the lighthouse in this photo. You'll probably notice that it looks a little bit different than it does today. And that's because in 1948, this lighthouse was constructed and brought over by vessel from Wisconsin and erected in that spot right there. The old wood one had become too fragile, for lack of a better word. So this lighthouse was placed in its spot, and the top black part was actually lifted by helicopter off of the old lighthouse and placed on this new lighthouse, or so the story goes. Here we have a view of Michigan Beach in the 1920s. And it appears it was quite a busy day, judging by the cars and the people you can see in the water. That's approximately what that view looks like today. Here's another view of Lake Michigan Beach in the late 1930s or early 1940s. Shuffleboard was also a popular activity at Lake Michigan Beach along with East Park. And here's one final view of Lake Michigan Beach. And this has to be pre-1948, as that's still the wood lighthouse. And I believe that's the same swing set, possibly the same slide as well. This is a view from the Channel Bridge looking south down Bridge Street in 1907. Notice that there are paved sidewalks, but yet the road is still dirt. And now we've jumped to the 1920s. I really like the transition of that one, even though the photo, the 1920s photo doesn't continue the rest of the way. As you can see, things got quite busy with vehicles. Here we are looking across the Fourth Channel Bridge in the late 1930s. And this is what it would look like around 1949 or the early 50s. And of course, our view from today. Just across the bridge on the northwest side of the road, we see the Argo Mill and the Fountain City House Hotel. The Argo Mill was started in 1885 as Riffenberg Milling Company. It specialized in fine flour made from wheat. After ownership changes, the mill became known as Argo Mill in 1903. Earl Young purchased the mill in 1953 after a decade of negotiating with the son-in-law of the then owner. He raised the building, but incorporated many of its timbers into the construction of today's Weather Vane restaurant. And here's another view of the Argo Mill, as well as the water tower, which was erected in 1901 and came down around 1994, I believe. Yep, close enough. This was Charlevoix's first hotel, the Fountain City House, which started as a 1.5-story boarding house and barn. It was built by Charlevoix pioneers Amos Fox and Hiram Rose in 1865. It was originally built to house builders who would soon go to work constructing Charlevoix's first commercial dock into Lake Michigan. The hotel received several additions, including 2 large ones in the late 1870s when a wing and 3rd floor were added. The hotel was in operation until 1953, and it was torn down 2 years later. The lot sat vacant until 1961, when construction began on Earl Young's Weather Vane.
Stop it. Oh my God.
He doesn't like the Weather Vane Hotel. Due to financial troubles, the hotel was not finished until 1964, which is approximately when this photo was taken. And this is what the hotel, of course, looks like today. And here's another side view of the Fountain City House. Gives you an idea of how big it was and where the Weather Vane is today. This image may have been taken from the Weather Vane after it was built in 1950s. But we see the South American docked in Round Lake and the Beaver Islander docked in the Channel. And today we have the Emerald Isle docked where the South American once was. This is the southeast corner of bridge. This is the southeast corner of bridge number 2 in the wintertime, showing the east railing and part of the roadbed. It's the only known photo that we have of bridge number 2, and it shows the massive amounts of lumber that are piled up along the north side of Round Lake for the Charlevoix Lumber Company. Lumber operations began along the north shore of Round Lake as early as 1868. The piles of wood could be seen along the north shore where it would be then loaded onto awaiting barges or vessels. Here's another image showing the lumber that's built up along the shore there. And here's an image of the Charlevoix Lumber Company building as it was being torn down. And if you look off to the right, you can see what looks like the Edgewater being built off to the side there. And the Edgewater is now in the location of where the lumber company once was. In 1899, a small 15-room hotel called the Pavilion opened on the shore of Lake Michigan near West Dixon Avenue. After only 5 years, the hotel doubled its size. In around 1915, the hotel would again expand. A Chicago architect drew up designs which extended the hotel down to the beach, making it 7 stories tall. The new hotel had 216 rooms and was the tallest building in Charlevoix at that time. And it was then called the Beach Hotel. Much like Charlevoix's other hotels of the same era, the Beach Hotel fell on hard times during the Great Depression. It struggled to remain economically viable, but the building was eventually abandoned in the 1960s. During demolition in 1967, the building caught fire and burned to the ground. Today, the Lacrosse Condominiums are located where the Beach Hotel once stood. And here's a view of the Beach Hotel from the water. And here's an image of it when it was being torn down. And then what is there today is Lacrosse Condominiums. This little house was 207 Michigan Avenue, but it was also torn down at some point and is now part of where Lacrosse Condominiums is located. This was 307 Michigan Avenue. This was taken in the early 1890s or around the 1890s. And today, this is the location of the Dunes Condominiums along Michigan Avenue. Here we see 431 Michigan Avenue. And the exterior of this home has not changed much over the years other than a noticeable addition of a garage off to the left. It almost looks exactly the same as it did. The addition of some shutters as well. This home is located on East Dixon Street. It's 414 East Dixon. And this home has not changed too much over the years either. It still has its painted glass window up in the attic. This is the Colonial Club that was located on Meach Street, which was a fine restaurant and an illegal gambling club. A raid on this establishment in 1947 put an end to the illegal gambling. It was torn down in the late 1960s and the gates were removed and later installed at the depot. And today there is a house there. The Chicago Club was founded in 1880 by members of the First Congregational Church of Chicago. The clubhouse seen here was the first structure built on the grounds in 1881. Here's a picture of the clubhouse circa 1940s. If you notice from the previous photo, the tower is no longer present, and there's much more vines, obviously, have grown up. But if you notice, the tower at the top, at some point, either fell down or was deconstructed. And since I did not want to trespass on the Chicago Club, here's a distant photo of the Chicago Clubhouse today. And here's a view of some of the Chicago Club grounds. These are the tennis courts that are just below the clubhouse. And today they have more modern hard courts. Here's some of the cottages on the Chicago Club grounds, probably at the turn of the century. And here are some of the cottages today up on the bluff. Here we see what is called Old River, which is the little river that separates that island from Round Lake, which is called Park Island? Park Island?
Old Island.
Old Island. This was the first tee of the Chicago Club golf course, which was located on the present, off of present-day Chicago Avenue. The northern boundary of the Chicago Club was just to the southwest of the Inn Hotel, which you can see in the background. The golf course was eventually reoriented after much of the land was platted to be sold as homes under the name of Lindsay Park. And Lindsay Park, the plat of Lindsay Park is basically the streets of Elm and Cherry and Oak. And this is about what that view would look like today. We're on Chicago Avenue, kind of looking towards the lake and where the depot is. The Chicago and West Michigan Railway commissioned to build this hotel called the Inn Hotel on the terrace above the depot in 1897. During its construction, it was hit with high winds and collapsed on itself, killing 2 of the workers. Rebuilding began and the inn was opened in June the following year. This would be the view of the inn looking down Dixon Avenue. Within the state, the inn was second in size after the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island. It had 250 rooms, which could sleep 800 people. Those who arrived by train could take a grand staircase up to the garden and fountain area. So here's the grand staircase that you could take to go up to the hotel. Here's the hotel being viewed from Mercer Boulevard. The Great Depression and a decrease in the number of guests arriving by train led to the demise of this hotel, and in 1940, the owners decided to sell it. And here's a picture of it being demolished in 1940. And unfortunately, one of our great hotels was lost like the others. And there's a view along Mercer Boulevard where the hotel once was. Here's another view from the opposite angle looking at the demolition of the hotel. And here we are looking down Chicago Avenue towards Lake Charlevoix. The inn's natatorium is at right, as well as a small newsstand, which is just off the screen where the little driveway is. And you can see the sign for the railroad crossing there. And this is what that view would approximately look like today. And here is the inn's natatorium. It was an indoor heated 150,000 gallon pool. It was open to the public for a small fee, and bathing suits and towels were available to anybody who came. The pool itself was 30 by 100 feet and had electric lights to light up the inside space. The building aged rapidly due to it often being humid inside, and the Chicago and West Michigan Railway sold it to the Chicago Club in 1899. The Chicago Club eventually tore it down in 1926. Between the depot and the beach, the landscape was well groomed with small gardens and the word Charlevoix laid out in the grass for all those who arrived by train to see. And today, this area is a little less grand. It's a little bland here. The inn also had a bathing pavilion that once jutted out into Lake Charlevoix, but it's unknown when this bathing pavilion was removed. And here, our final few slides, we see the depot. This is the image. This is an image of the depot from 1898, and it gives you a great look at what the staircase up to the inn hotel looked like off to the right there. And from donations to our capital campaign, the society was able to replace numerous shakes on the depot, reglaze some of the windows, and perform other restoration work, which you see happening in this photo. And we also repainted the depot to its historic colors. We had wood samples extracted from various parts of the building, and they were sent off to a lab to determine the original colors of the depot. The original colors that we painted it were Dart Hunter Green, Dusted Olive, and Peace Yellow. And here's another view of the depot, and you can see that staircase leading up to the inn hotel. And then what that view looked like back in 2018 when renovation was happening. And you can see the beautiful garden that the garden club takes care of. And here's our final image of the depot, and the final image of our presentation is of a train pulling up to the depot circa the turn of the century. And then here's the depot, likely when it was still in operation, but seen far less rail traffic as passenger rail traffic ended in 1965. Somewhere around there. Passenger service ended in 62 and freight ended in 82. And then a final photo of the depot from 2018. And with that, I wrap up and I thank everybody for joining us tonight. There's an aerial image of Charlevoix, probably around 1947, as that temporary fifth bridge is shown off to the right as they rerouted Bridge Street. And if Denise is recording, Denise, you can end recording now, and we